Isaiah that was read. And this passage came to the children of Israel at a most difficult time in their history, a time of impending doom and heartbreak. Yet in Isaiah 29:18 and 19, he says, "The day is coming when the deaf will hear the words of the scroll. Out of gloom and darkness the eyes of the blind will see. Once more the humble will rejoice in the Lord, the needy will rejoice in the Holy One of Israel." And here Isaiah is pointing to a day when the Holy One of Israel would come, and these struggling people's lives would be touched. Heaven touching earth. When Mary and I lived in Ongoro, I got something in the back of my foot that would make me wake up at night scratching like crazy. And there was a little red line on the back of my foot, and it was moving up every night. It would move up more toward my leg. And the neighbors told me that there was a little worm under the skin. And at night when a person sleeps, that little worm moves and it goes up, and it was driving me nuts. Well, my neighbor told me that I needed to go to the health promoter in Santa Fe, and that the health promoter there could help me. Well, there had been MCC volunteers in Santa Fe, and they had trained a health promoter. But it was about a 7-kilometer horseback ride to get there, crossing the Surutu River. And it was a very steep ride, and I thought, boy, is that really worth it to see if that health promoter is going to actually be there in that health post then? And then, what chances would there be that he'd actually have some medicine for me? But anyway, I was desperate, and so I took that 7-kilometer horse ride one way, got on Dancer and took him up there. When I got there, well, the health post door was open, which was a very good sign. Didn't expect that, really. And then as I got off my horse, this man stepped out the door, and he actually looked like a health promoter. And we greeted each other and got to know him a bit, and he talked about the MCC volunteers who had been there. And I showed him my problem, and it didn't look very good by then because I'd scratched all the skin off that area, and that little red line was still advancing up my leg. He looked at it, oh yeah, he knows what this is. I think he called it a kind of sabayun, although a lot of things I think were sabayun, including athlete's foot and everything else. This was one's little worm. And actually, we looked it up later in a tropical disease book, and it's called creeping eruption. What a name. Well, he told me he had a salve that I could put on that would kill that worm. And he handed me a tube of salve. And I looked at the writing on that tube and got down to active ingredient DDT. And I was like, wow, I'm getting some help here. Heaven touched earth that day in the form of an MCC church health promoter who sold me a tube of salve that's active ingredient DDT. You know, and I had to think of the many people that health promoter helped throughout the years after those MCC volunteers left. Heaven touching earth. You know, I had to cut out a number of stories. And I trust that we all have stories. Heaven meeting earth. Seeing children learn to read, adults learning to read, Heifer Project cows giving milk to a family for the first time, families getting habitat houses, people growing Brazilian black beans, singing songs with those people, our neighbors in those little churches, praising the Lord. Heaven touching earth. Our last term in Bolivia, part of my work was with the Bolivian Mennonite churches, and once I was visiting a guy, I think his name was Seferino, Jesus' husband. Wasn't that Seferino? And she in particular was a leader in the Bolivian Mennonite church there in San Julián do Lourenço. And we were at his house, and he was showing me his well, and it was an obvious MCC well. And I asked him, I said, how did you get that well? He said, well, after the volunteers left, I finally got enough money to pay for a well. And so he went over to Las Gamas, where Hugo Rivera lived, and the volunteers there, I mean, absolutely did an amazing thing, and coming up with a post-hole digger system adapted with pipes you get attached to drill wells out there in that area, and it worked. And his well was about 22 meters deep. And, you know, I asked him, have you ever had to clean this well or maintain it anyway? He says, no, I haven't done a thing to it. And he said, in fact, since I put that well in over 20 years ago, I think it has more water in it now than it's ever had. Those are the volunteers who somehow came up with that idea. Such a practical thing that a local person could keep making the equipment and installing wells for people. Heaven touching earth, you know, and then talking with Seferino, he had a small herd of cattle there, and the well was actually right by his water tank, where he put water in for them. And you asked him about his cattle. He said, you know, 20 years ago, he got his first animal, his heifer project animal. And now he had this very nice little herd of cattle, milk cows, brown Swiss. And the Mennonite church there continues to bring a bit of heaven to earth. I think it was in about 1990 that Roger Gutierrez, actually Roger Gutierrez, such a good and capable church leader in that community, he came to me and talked about a man in their community who lived by himself in a totally dilapidated, very, very small shack, maybe 2 meters by 2 meter shack on the edge of town. And he said he wanted me to come meet him because they wanted to help him. And so I went to meet this man. He was a person who had some serious mental and physical disabilities. And I remember Roger saying that it's una vergüenza, it's a shame that in our community someone lives like this. So the church organized a project where they would do all the labor along with this man who lived under those conditions. But they needed money to buy materials to get a nice house. And those people, being the resourceful people they were, they knew this man had relatives in Santa Cruz who had left the community and gone to Santa Cruz and actually were quite successful. And so they went there and told him, you know, man, you have a relative out here who lives under horrible conditions. And they got them to donate money for the materials. And I remember by the time they got done raising that money and the people saying that here's a church who's willing to build a house if we donate the materials, that there was hardly anything left for MCC to donate. I think we made a small contribution in some way, but it was actually very small. But not only did building this guy a decent house help him to live in a more healthy way, this process increased the relationship that he had with the church and with the larger community. It was a new beginning for him. So heaven continues to touch earth out there in those communities through the sacrifice of our brothers and sisters. I want to end this message by saying that each one of us here today, as we served in Bolivia, our lives were deeply touched and transformed by our Bolivian neighbors. And that's why it's hard for me to even share these stories without crying. And even hearing us sing these songs in Spanish this morning was very, very touching to me. But the question that I want to leave us now as we go from this place is the same one that our Indiana Mission Conference is bringing to our congregation. Where are those places in my life today where I'm God's instrument in helping to bring a bit of heaven to the people around me? The needs are different here, but there are a lot of hurting and broken people in the communities where we live. So may God's kingdom come, may God's will be done, as in heaven, so also on earth.